Ruth had a sister who called every Sunday at 4 p.m. The calls lasted 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. Ruth would sit in the chair by the window, the one with the view of the maple tree, and she would listen. Her sister talked about her job, about her husband, about the neighbor whose dog barked too early, about everything that was wrong and nothing that was right. Ruth would nod. Ruth would murmur. Ruth would say, "That sounds hard," and "I'm sorry," and "You must be exhausted." Ruth's husband, Paul, would walk through the living room during these calls, and he would see his wife, this woman who had raised 2 children, who had managed a bookstore for 27 years, who once negotiated a lease with a landlord who made grown men cry, reduced to a series of quiet, nodding yeses. And he would keep walking because he had learned not to say anything. One Sunday, the phone rang at 4 p.m., and Ruth didn't pick it up. She sat in the chair by the window and watched it ring. 4 rings, 5, voicemail. The maple tree was starting to turn. It was October. Ruth was 68 years old, and she realized, sitting there in the quiet, that she had been holding her breath during those phone calls, every Sunday, for 19 years. Here's what Ruth didn't know yet. That phone call was never about her sister. It was about Ruth's inability to say, "This is not mine." The guilt wasn't hers. The obligation wasn't hers. The emotional weight of another person's unhappiness, carried silently every Sunday for 19 years, was never supposed to be hers. But nobody had ever told Ruth that she was allowed to put it down. And Ruth isn't unusual. She's just the person who finally noticed. Here's the first loop most of us are stuck in without knowing it. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you apologized for something that wasn't your fault? Not a real apology. Not, "I'm sorry I hurt you." The other kind. The kind you say when someone bumps into you at the grocery store. The kind you say when a waiter brings you the wrong order. The kind you say when you take up space in a room. "I'm sorry, could I just... Sorry, would it be okay if..." Ruth apologized to her sister for things she didn't do. "I'm sorry you're unhappy. I'm sorry work is hard. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Here's the thing about the apology habit. It's not a habit. It's a contract you signed without reading it. The contract says, if I apologize for things that aren't my fault, you'll like me. You'll think I'm kind. You'll believe I'm considerate. And for a while it works. People do think you're kind. People do think you're considerate. But here's what the contract doesn't tell you. Every time you apologize for something that isn't yours, you're telling your nervous system one thing. I am responsible for other people's discomfort. I am the shock absorber. I am the one who makes things smooth. And after 40 years of that, your nervous system doesn't know the difference between someone else's bad mood and your own failure. So here's what I want you to try. This week, catch one apology before it leaves your mouth. Not all of them. 1. When the waiter brings you the wrong dish, instead of, "I'm sorry," try, "This isn't what I ordered." When someone bumps into you, try nothing. Just keep walking. See what happens. What will happen is this. Nothing. Nothing bad. The world will not end. The person will not hate you. You will have simply stopped carrying something that was never yours to begin with. And that feeling, that small, quiet feeling of "I didn't apologize and nothing broke," that's the first loop. Which brings us to the second loop. Because once you stop apologizing, you start noticing something else. Something that's been running underneath the apologies the whole time. Frank spent 41 years in a job where performance was measured. Quarterly reviews. Annual goals. Someone above him, always, telling him whether he was doing enough. And then he retired. And there was nobody above him. And for 3 months, Frank didn't know what to do with himself. Not because he was bored, because he had no idea whether he was doing a good job at being retired. He found himself telling the cashier at the hardware store that he used to be a regional manager. He found himself mentioning his old salary to the man who fixed his gutters. He was still performing, still auditioning, still waiting for someone, anyone, to say, "You're doing enough. You're good. You matter." Whose approval are you still chasing? And here's the harder question. What would happen if you stopped? Most of us don't realize how much mental energy we spend managing other people's opinions of us. We don't say the thing because someone might think it's strange. We don't take the trip because someone might think it's irresponsible. We don't wear the shirt because someone might think it's not age-appropriate. And the strange part is, most of the people whose opinions we're managing aren't even thinking about us. They're thinking about themselves. They're worried about their own shirt, their own trip, their own thing they didn't say. You've been editing yourself for an audience that isn't watching. And the cost of that editing, that constant, quiet, exhausting editing, is that the person you actually are never gets to walk into the room. The edited version walks in. The polished version. The version that won't offend anyone or confuse anyone or make anyone uncomfortable. And you wonder why you feel invisible. Here's the reframe. Every time you catch yourself wondering what will they think, ask a different question. What do I think? Not what should I think? Not what's the right answer. What do I actually think? That question is a muscle. And for a lot of people over 60, it's a muscle that hasn't been used in decades. Because someone else was always setting the standard. A boss, a parent, a spouse. A culture that told you what a person your age should want, should do, should be. Start using the muscle. It's still there. It's just been waiting for someone to ask. Now here's the one that trips up people who've spent their whole lives being reliable. This is the loop that sounds like loyalty but feels like a weight. Margaret said yes to the book club for 11 years. She didn't like the books. She didn't particularly enjoy the women. The meetings were on Thursday nights, and by Thursday night Margaret was tired. But she had said yes once in 2012, and she had never figured out how to stop. 11 years. 143 meetings. Books she didn't enjoy with people she didn't particularly like. On Thursday nights when she was tired. Here's the question Margaret never asked herself. Who told me I owe them forever? Not who asked me. Not who invited me. Who told me? And more importantly, who did I believe? That once I say yes, I can never say no. The obligation echo is one of the heaviest forms of emotional clutter. It's the weight of commitments you made to a version of yourself who had different energy, different priorities, a different life. It's the holiday dinner you've hosted for 20 years even though you're exhausted before the guests arrive. It's the phone call you take every week from the friend who only talks about herself. It's the volunteer position you took because nobody else would 5 years ago. And you're still showing up. Some of these obligations started as gifts. But a gift you've been giving for 11 years without wanting to give it, that's not a gift anymore. That's a tax. And you're the only one paying it. You do not need permission to stop doing something you started a decade ago. The person who said yes in 2012 is not the person sitting in the chair right now. She had different energy, different capacity, a different life. You're allowed to say, that was her commitment. It doesn't have to be mine. What would happen if you let one obligation go? Not all of them. 1. The book club, the committee, the call, the dinner. What would you do with that Thursday night? What would you feel? Probably guilt. For a few weeks, maybe a few months. And then, underneath the guilt, space. Quiet. A Thursday night that belongs to you. And the discovery that the world didn't end when you stopped carrying something that was never supposed to be permanent. And speaking of things that quietly drain your emotional energy, this next one is so subtle you might not even register it as clutter. But it is. It's one of the heaviest. David's retirement plan was supposed to include travel. That's what everyone said. That's what the magazines showed. Couples on beaches, hiking groups in national parks, Mediterranean cruises with matching windbreakers. David didn't want to travel. David wanted to build furniture in his garage. He wanted to take his grandson fishing. He wanted to read the 27 books on his shelf that he'd been saving since 1987. But every time he opened Facebook, and David opened Facebook a lot, especially after dinner, when the house got quiet, there they were. The beaches, the hiking groups, the matching windbreakers. People he went to high school with had become people who took Mediterranean cruises, and David, in his garage, with his unfinished bookshelf and his 27 unread books, felt like he was doing retirement wrong. Whose life are you measuring yours against? And did you ever actually want that life? Or did someone just tell you it was the right one? David didn't want a Mediterranean cruise. He didn't want matching windbreakers. He wanted his garage. He wanted his grandson. He wanted his books. But he couldn't enjoy what he wanted because he was too busy feeling inadequate about what he didn't want. That's the comparison spiral. And it's not about jealousy. It's about losing track of what you actually value. Here's a quiet exercise. Take a piece of paper. Write down, not what you think you should want, not what the magazines say, not what your neighbor is doing. What do you actually want? A Tuesday morning. What does your Tuesday morning look like? David's Tuesday morning was a cup of coffee, the smell of sawdust, and a phone call from his grandson asking if they could go fishing. That was the life he had. That was the life he wanted. He just hadn't given himself permission to stop comparing it to someone else's. Stop scrolling through other people's lives and calling it research. It's not research. It's a distraction from the life you're actually living. And the life you're actually living, the one with the garage and the grandson and the 27 books, deserves your full attention. It's the only one that's real. And now, we're at the deepest one. The one underneath all the others. This is the loop most people never even see, because they've been inside it for so long, it just looks like the air they breathe. Ruth, the woman with the Sunday phone calls, grew up in a house where being good mattered more than being honest. Her mother was good. Her grandmother was good. Good women didn't complain. Good women didn't say no. Good women made things smooth. Good women absorbed. Ruth learned this before she learned to read, and she carried it silently, faithfully, for 68 years. It wasn't a decision she made. It was a story she inherited. And the story had one rule: your needs come last. If you're uncomfortable, that means you're doing it right. Who wrote the script you're still reading from? Not the script for your life. The script for who you're supposed to be. The script that says, good mothers always answer the phone. Strong men don't ask for help. Nice people don't disappoint others. Successful retirees travel. Worthy people are productive. You didn't write those lines. You inherited them. From parents, from culture, from a world that had very clear ideas about what a person of a certain age should do, should want, should be. And here's the thing. You're allowed to edit the script. You don't have to throw it out. You don't have to burn the whole thing down. But you're allowed to cross out a line. Good women don't complain. Cross it out. Strong men don't ask for help. Cross it out. If you're not productive, you're not valuable. Cross it out. This is the deepest form of emotional decluttering. Deeper than the apologies, deeper than the approval, deeper than the obligations and the comparisons. This is about looking at the story someone else handed you, maybe decades ago, maybe before you could talk. and deciding which parts are actually yours. The parts that are yours, you keep. The parts that were never yours, you're allowed to put them down. You do not need to carry someone else's version of who you should be. That weight was never supposed to be yours. Ruth didn't pick up the phone on that Sunday in October. Her sister called again the next Sunday, and the Sunday after that. On the third Sunday, Ruth answered. And when her sister started talking about her job, about her husband, about the neighbor whose dog barked too early, Ruth said something she had never said before. She said, "I only have 20 minutes today." Her sister paused. A beat, 2 beats. And then she said, "Okay." That was it. That was the whole revolution. 20 minutes instead of 45. A boundary the width of a maple leaf. And when Ruth hung up the phone, she sat in the chair by the window and noticed something. She wasn't exhausted. She wasn't hollowed out. She was just finished. A call that ended because she said it would end. The world didn't break. Her sister didn't stop loving her. Ruth had simply stopped carrying something that was never hers to carry. And the space where the guilt used to be, that heavy, familiar weight she'd worn for 19 years, was quiet. Just quiet. Just a chair by a window in October, and the maple tree turning, and the sound of her own breathing. That is what emotional decluttering does. It doesn't change the other person. It changes where you put the weight. So here's what I want you to do. This week, notice one loop. Just one. Maybe it's the apology you almost gave but didn't. Maybe it's the approval you didn't ask for. Maybe it's the obligation you realized you could let go of. Maybe it's the comparison you caught yourself making and then stopped. Maybe it's the inherited line you finally crossed out. One loop. 1 week. One small, quiet decision that says, "This is not mine. I'm putting it down." And if you do, if you catch one of these loops and break it, even for a moment, I would love to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell us, which loop did you notice? What did you do with it? What did it feel like? Thank you for being here today, for giving this time to yourself. If this felt helpful, share it with someone who might be carrying something that isn't theirs. And subscribe if you want more of this, not advice that adds to the weight, but conversations that help you set it down.